Hi guys, and welcome back. This is a topic of discussion that comes up pretty often with your runners of kind of what should I be eating and that kind of thing for success in these various races. And the way I would break that down is it really kind of depends on what you're doing at practice and all those different things, because some fuel sources are going to be better for other things, but it really comes down to sort of three basic things that we use for fuel source. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through those three different fuel sources, show you what each of them is good for, not only just in general terms, but kind of using this energy continuum here so you can kind of decide for yourself what's the best thing and why you would be using different things, fueling up different ways before various activities. So on the right hand side here, this is from USATF's Distance Coaches Curriculum, Energy Continuum. Everything here, even though it looks kind of crazy, is all based on your 2-mile pace or your VO2 max, your fastest aerobic pace. Everything to the left of this that gets higher than 100% is based on that VO2 max. So this is energy, or at different paces that get bigger energy systems from the anaerobic system. And so this is like your speed workouts, your intervals, your special endurance 1, special endurance 2, intensive tempo, fly 30, alactic type things, speed endurance. And to the right are your more aerobic type workouts. You would obviously do these as extensive tempo or extensive interval or VO2 max intervals, whatever you would call them. And then you've also got in here your tempo type runs, which would be continuous runs, and your aerobic threshold, or your long or easy pace workouts. So if you're looking at that, that's what that means, and I'll refer to it in a second. So kind of king for your distance runners and middle distance runners, because they're using the aerobic system, is this little guy right here, which is simple basic carbohydrate, the most basic carbohydrates that your body can use. There's various ways carbohydrates look when they go into your body. You're going to have different ones that are connected with different chains and that kind of thing. Some of them are more complex than others. You talk about complex carbohydrates. They would have a bunch of these things strung together. They take more time to digest, so that's kind of why they're touted as more healthy, because your body burns through them. But eventually your body's going to break it down into this very simple molecule here. So basically, once it is broken down in your body, and if it comes this way, it can be more readily available as fuel source, but if it's connected in a bunch of different complex ways, it takes longer. What this here, this carbohydrate, is going to be 4 calories per gram. So a gram of this gives you 4 calories of energy. The problem that humans have is we can store a lot of fat, right? So a human can be lost somewhere for weeks with very little fuel, very little food sources, or any food sources, and they're not going to starve to death, provided they are not doing a ton of activity all the time, right? You hear about that all the time. I was lost in the woods or whatever, and I didn't starve to death. I had so much extra stored fat. But that's only if you're doing a certain type of exercise, and that'll make sense as we kind of look at it, a certain type of energy expenditure. Humans can only store this as what's called glycogen for about 2 hours worth, okay, as glycogen. So your body will take this, it'll kind of like wrap it into different areas, so it's kind of longer and more complex. It stores it in working muscle, so if you're an aerobic distance runner, your body's going to store more of this in and around the working muscles, so right around your heart, but mostly also in your legs and that kind of thing, less so in your upper body, because it's not where it's being demanded the most of. Your body is also going to store a lot of glycogen in your brain. Your brain is only going to use carbohydrates unless you're in an absolute starvation mode. It's only going to use carbohydrates for its fuel source, and it's also going to store a lot of it in your liver. But all those things added up, you've only got about 2 hours worth of glycogen. This is why when you kind of talk about, or you hear maybe people that are in longer races like the marathon, they talk about that 2-hour window as being the wall, because after 2 hours you're not going to have this fuel source. And as we look here, it's very simple, so you can use it at high intensity. So after it's gone, the intensity is going to drop off, okay? So this looks very, very, very simple. Your body can easily break this down and turn it into fuel source if you're eating it, or if you're using this 2 hours worth of stored glycogen. Very simple, high, fast intensities. So it's going to be used, if we look over here, on tempo days and faster. So if we look over here, it's sort of a misnomer to say not only you've got your 3 different energy systems, right? You've got your anaerobic alactic, the fastest energy system, your anaerobic glycolytic, the one that is your mid-level speed system, then you've got your aerobic energy systems. those are always working all the time, and each of those have sort of a more preferred fuel source or a fuel way of breaking things down. So your body's always using this. So when I say used on tempo days and faster, that's a misnomer because you're going to be using all of this. It's just in terms of the vast majority. So let's say here on a tempo run. A tempo run is a relatively fast to medium pace workout. You know, if I'm thinking, for example, for me right now, I've got a young man who's a 940 2-miler. His tempo workouts are pretty fast, relatively speaking. It's like 540. I think it dips down into the 530s a little bit, out to maybe like 550, something like that. That's relatively high intensity. Relatively, so they say medium to medium high intensity. So your body's working pretty fast. It's right at the area where hydrogen ions are accumulating, but your body can clear it. So you're going to be burning a lot of this altogether. What's in your blood system from what you ate maybe for lunch that day. If it's a morning workout, hopefully what you ate for breakfast that day. And then when that is exhausted, it's going to go to the stored glycogen in your liver and the working muscles. Working muscles first and then in your liver. It's part of the reason why you would always want your kids to eat something carbohydrate rich right before, not right before a race, but the morning of a race. Say you've got at least 2 hours or so in between, something like that. It's why if you've got kids coming to workouts on the weekend that you have in the morning and they haven't eaten anything, they may not be as effective because they don't have any fresh carbohydrates in their bloodstream. So tempo workouts, you've got this being burned at high intensities here at VO2 max. Going down here, the workout reps would get a little bit shorter, but your special 1, special 2, this is all going to be carbohydrate burning right up until right about here. So anything that's in this orange to yellow is going to be burning this primarily in bulk because, as I said, so we've got this tempo workout, medium high, to special endurance 1, even out to even speed endurance, part of this right here in red, is going to be like your 400-meter pace or right in around there, maybe 300 meters at a very, very fast intensity, that kind of thing. Reps, you might be doing repeat 150s or 200s or something like that. That is very fast, high-intensity work. Your body will not be able to use these other 3 fuel sources to supply the energy as it will in this, and here's the reason why. So now we're going to look at the second fuel source, and it is this. This is what a molecule of fat looks like. This is a super complex fuel storage machine, right? But as I mentioned, this is super complex. We've got these 3 triglycerides on here. They're connected all the way up here on the top. This is very, very complex, has a lot of potential energy, but because it's so complex, your body will not be able to break it down at a fast rate. If your body is presented with this or this, and you're doing repeat 400s, it is going to want to use this because of how simple it is. This, it's going to use for something else. So let's kind of take you through here. So fat molecules, very good at storing energy. So over here in carbohydrates, we had 4 calories per gram. Fat is going to have 9 calories per gram, so more than double, right? Humans, as we mentioned, are very good at storing fat. We can store days, weeks, maybe even a month worth of this, depending. Even a pretty slim distance runner is going to have plenty of fat stores. So we talked about your body storing glycogen for 2 hours, part of it in your working muscle. It's going to store this by the working muscles too, for the same reason, because it's going to want to use this when you're asking for it in a workout or a race or whatever. Very, very complex, so it's difficult to use as fuel at high intensity. Your body will not be able to use this if you're doing something very fast. We want to use as much of this on long and recovery runs. Okay, so if we've got days, weeks, maybe a month worth of this, and only 2 hours worth of this stored, we want to spare this as much as possible and use as much of this as we can on the days that we can. So, long and recovery runs. We look over here, back at the energy continuum. Well, I said anything from here to very, very out to the edge of here is going to be basically all carbohydrates. There's going to be some fat being stored or used. There's going to be some other fuel sources being used. But for the most part, it's going to be mainly carbohydrate used. Anything from here and lower, and actually that's even a misnomer, it really should be about here, is going to be mostly carbohydrates because the intensity is high. So even something here, say a marathon pace workout, you go out at 82%. You're not building any acid. It's not crazy, crazy fast, but still, for your body, it's too fast to use a lot of this. It's going to use some of this, but not a lot. In fact, a lot of marathon pace training is to get your body to be able to use more of this at higher intensities. So in the marathon, you don't hit that wall at 2 hours because you've been using more and more of this. But a marathon runner is doing a lot of specific marathon pace training. Most people are going to be trying to get ready for a 5K or whatever it is that they're trying to get ready for. So you're not going to be doing a ton of this, and you don't really need to do it because your races are not going out to 2 hours. So maybe a 5K kid, a 2-miler, miler, half-miler, that kind of thing, you really just want to spare the glycogen so that you can get through your week's workouts and that kind of thing as effectively as possible. So when you have a coach that goes out there and they give you a pace, so that same kid I was telling you about before, that is doing, he's a 940 2-miler, he's doing his tempo runs at about, say, 550, right? I'm going to have that kid do his long runs right here at 70% of his VO2 max or his 2-mile pace. And for him, it's just under 7-minute pace. It's like 655-ish. I think his window is like 7 flat to 650. So that is pretty easy for somebody like this. That's what's called, conversation pace. Gossip pace, a pace you can talk at the whole time. The reason being is you can hold this for up to 2 hours, but it's because it's at your aerobic threshold. It's the pace where your body can use fat, and it's still going to be using carbohydrates, but it's going to be using both of these fuel sources equally because it's at such a low intensity. Right here at 70% is that sweet spot of where your body is going to be able to use equal parts fat to carbohydrates, so you're sparing, say, half the glycogen that you would be doing. So if that kid I was telling you about were to go out and decide to run at 75% that day, so like 630, they wouldn't really be getting any more aerobic benefit. It's still the same general aerobic development, but they would be burning much more of the glycogen, the carbohydrates that's in their body. So if we went out and we did, say, a long run, and the young man's name is Jared, and I said, all right, Jared, let's go out and run, our easy pace. And he's like, all right, 650 to 7 flat, perfect. But he decides at some point, this is too easy. I'm just going to go out and do my own thing, and I'm going to run right here at, let's call it 80% that day. And he comes back and is like, Coach, I felt great. I did my long run. I ran for 75 minutes or whatever, and I was able to hold 630. Now, that could mean that he's reset his numbers and you need to retest them. That's very possible. But more than likely, that kid felt that way because they can certainly run that pace for a one-off, right? But what if that kid then came back the next day and, all right, Jared, we're going to now do VO2 max intervals. We're going to do 4 times mile repeats, 6,400 meters. Well, that same easy workout the day before that totally gobbled up a lot of the spared glucose and glycogen in their body, that is now going to be gone. So when they try and use their VO2 max, their 2-mile pace for 6,400 meters, well, they're going to have a little bit of this because your body restores it, but they're not going to have a lot. So halfway through that workout, they are probably going to bonk or hit the wall the same way a marathon person because they're going to switch to this because they don't have any more carbohydrates. Or in reality, at about 20% stored glycogen, that 2-hour window, your body's got about 20% of glycogen left. But as I mentioned, your brain will only use this. So your body or your brain is going to give preferential treatment to itself and say, all right, that's it. No more carbohydrates. No more converting glycogen to carbohydrates. Liver, don't shut down, but stop converting this stored glycogen. I need all of this. The body's going to now have to rely on fat. And this is why a marathoner hits the wall. This is why somebody who might go out to you say, hey, Coach, I felt great this day, but then the next day maybe doesn't look so great. Maybe it's that kid that always wants to run up a training group, try to run with people that they're not quite with yet, looks maybe they perceive or they might appear to be weaker on these harder days, and it's not. It's just that they're killing themselves on the days that they need to spare this fuel source or this fuel source that we're trying to spare. Now, the young man that I was mentioning about here, Jared, he would never do that because we've kind of talked about these things, and he knows why 70% is so important. Now, it's a very small window here, 70%. Your newer runners might need to be at 65%. I give my first-year runners a window of 65 to 70% for their VO2 for their easy runs. A kid like Jared, who's been running with us for a number of years, I give him right at 70% or right around it, say a 10-second window. So maybe his 70% is like 653. I'll say, all right, run 650 to 7. It's the same. That's close enough to where it's fine. But you also don't want to go crazy in the other direction and have a kid say, all right, well, if this is good, then this is going to be better. Anything out of this range, and you're not really getting a lot of aerobic development. It's really just for maybe fat loss kind of reasons or that kind of thing. And it's the reason why, if you've ever been on a treadmill or a stationary bike and it's got kind of different settings, and it might be on a treadmill says fat burning mode, and it's pretty slow, it's really not a fast setting, but then it might have like aerobic or endurance or performance or something else that's a much faster intensity. It's for this reason. I mean, it's not incorrect. You do burn more fat at this intensity down here from not 70%, but maybe under 65%. You are burning pretty much only fat. Your body's like, all right, I don't need to use any of the stored glucose or glycogen. Fat can rule the day on this one. I don't have to do anything. But you're also burning fewer calories. You're doing less work. So it is true to say that it's fat burning mode. But for the case of training an actual runner, there'd be no real reason to do it out here unless it's for some kind of psychological reason. That you're just trying to give them a very easy day, both physically and mentally, and you're just trying to do something in terms of the art of coaching. So those are the main things. So we talked about glycogen and glucose is the vast majority of these faster paces, which makes sense. A distance runner needs a lot of this because it's their primary fuel source. We talked about how fat can be used to spare the glycogen on these two very important runs, the long run, which is probably the most important workout during your cross-country season, and your recovery runs that get you good aerobic work in between the faster days. But we haven't talked about this last one here, which is protein. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. I didn't realize it was quite that small. So protein's a little more kind of a complex idea because there's different things in here. Your body wants to use this to restore structures, right? So repair muscles, and that's not what I'm going to be talking about here in terms of fuel source, right? Because if you go out and you do a really intense lifting session, or maybe a really hard hill running session, which is nowhere on this energy continuum, because hill runs are strength run. Your body's going to use a lot of this to repair and rebuild the damaged structures after the fact. But, and your body really doesn't want to use protein as a fuel source, and we'll talk about it here. So it's used to create body structures. It still has 4 calories per gram, just like the carbohydrates. Second most abundant part of the human body after water. What we use to repair after workouts. It's only going to be used as a fuel when in starvation mode. So we talk about that person that, again, is out there in the woods, and they've been lost for maybe 3 weeks. They had enough fat to kind of get through to that point, and then all of a sudden, it's sort of critical mass time, and your body's like, well, I'm either going to have to gobble up some of the protein that's there as sort of unused muscle and that kind of thing, and that's sort of a last-ditch effort. That's really when your body uses it as a fuel source for the most part. 9 out of 10 times, that's the only reason your body would use this. It's going to use it for those other reasons, for the structural reasons. However, there's a very slim part of this energy continuum that we have not talked about here. So speed endurance, this is usually characterized as anything from, say, over 70 meters to 150 meters, that kind of workout. That is carbohydrate producing. Then you've got the very slim, all the way out here, anaerobic power, purely alactic system that is the first 6 to 7 seconds of anybody's race. It's if you ever hear a distance coach say the first 6 seconds are free. Why, if you've ever run yourself and you're like, wow, I just feel amazing the very, very beginning, but then you have to kind of settle in. Why the start of all these races are so fast, that is your anaerobic alactic system there. It uses what is called creatine phosphate to supply the energy. So you've got, your body's just kind of sitting there, you've got available ATP that's just sitting in all your muscles, right? Your muscles cannot contract without ATP. So it's always in there, it's always kind of being used and recharged. The ATP, or the TP part of that, is triphosphate. So it's got 3 phosphates, and the way the energy kind of is made in your body is the last phosphate splits off, and now the ATP is ADP, or, it's 2 phosphates, or dual phosphate diphosphate. What the creatine phosphate does that your body has, which lasts 6 to 7 seconds, is creatine phosphate. The creatine phosphate that's in your body, it loans this phosphate onto that ADP to essentially recharge the ATP. So you're kind of sitting there, say you've got someone that's at the starting line for the mile, and the gun goes off, and the first maybe 3 steps, you're breaking inertia, it's the fastest energy you need. The ATP in your muscles take care of that to begin with, and then it's gone. Used very, very quickly. Quickly recharged by the anaerobic alactic system to the It's the second fastest way of using energy after the available ATP, and that'll take you out to about, say, 50, 60, maybe 70 meters if it's a trained sprinter. We're talking about 6 to 7 seconds here. And then, after all the creatine phosphate, because you've only got that very limited supply, then your body is going to switch back to carbohydrates, store glucose. It's going to start burning it with what's called glycolysis, your faster speed system. That's all this part in here. So if you want to kind of think of how your race is going to work, we've got that miler that goes off in the first three. Say that first couple of steps with the ATP plus out to first 60 meters is going to be taken care of with this ATP and the creatine phosphate, so right here. Then your body's going to switch over to this combined zone. This is where the glycogen is being burned in a very high intensity. Maybe it's the 400, which is about right in here, 800-meter race, 1,500-meter race, 2-mile, whatever it is at that point. But then you also need to get the aerobic system kind of going and charged up with its system, which takes maybe 60 to 90 seconds. It's part of the reason why you do a warm-up, to be closer to that point. But essentially, this is what takes care of the first 6 to 7 seconds. So that is sort of the end of that discussion here of the 3 different fuel sources. So protein is going to take care of the first couple of seconds of your actual workout or each workout rep. This recharges, by the way, creatine phosphate recharges in about 3 minutes. 80 to 90% of it recharges in 3 minutes, and about 98% of what you had in your body recharges after about 8 to 10 minutes, closer to 10 minutes. You're not going to get back to 100% stored until you consume animal protein. Creatine phosphate is only an animal protein. Again, it's for fast muscle contraction. Plants do not have fast muscle contraction, so it does not have any creatine phosphate. So if you're doing something like a Fly 30 workout, an alactic workout, a very important thing for running economy and strength and the stretch shortening cycle, even for a distance runner, that would be kind of a day that you might want to have a little more animal protein in your dinner. If you go out and you do, say, a very fast interval day, maybe you're doing mile repeats at VO2 max, or maybe you're doing 400s at an intensive tempo. Maybe it's simulating a mile workout or something. Maybe you're doing repeat 200, something like that. You've burned a lot of this. Maybe you do a continuous tempo run. Definitely. You're going to want to eat a meal that's a little bit higher in your carbohydrates. After a 5K race, you're going to do the same thing. If you were doing a 10K race, a lot of carbohydrates. But if you're doing a lot of these bulk runs, your long runs, your recovery runs, the staple of a distance runner's sort of platform, you don't really have to do a lot in terms of a specialty sort of replacement meal, right? Just a balanced approach. You're going to be burning equal parts fat to carbohydrates, provided you're in that right zone. And that's kind of how that all will take place. One thing I did forget to mention, talking about this recharging in 3 minutes, that is why if you wanted to work on this energy system, the idea of the creatine phosphate coming back, those strength gains that come with Fly 30s, you need to give at least 3 to 4 minutes in between. Otherwise, this is not going to recharge, and you're going to start using glycogen, and it's going to be starting to produce acid, so it's a different type of workout, which is a good workout. It's one of those ideas, again, of knowing what you want to train, and part of knowing what you want to train is what fuel source you're using, and that's part of the conversation we had here today. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments down below. If you found this helpful, please think about sharing it around. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.